Hey class, this is Dr. Briscoe. In this lesson we're going to study legal dimensions. We have already studied standards, the standards that guide nursing practice. We've also had a recording and lesson on healthcare quality. We've looked at the concept of quality, attributes and criteria for quality care. We've looked at the quality control process. We've touched on error reduction, regulatory agencies, and many more topics. In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit deeper about standards. In particular, we're going to talk about laws that govern nursing practice. So the definition of a law is a standard or rule of conduct established and enforced by the government. It's designed to protect the rights of the public. Shown here are elements of professional and legal regulation of nurse practice. The state nurse practice acts are the most important laws that affect nursing practice. They outline what is expected of a nurse to care for patients within their practice limits and what happens if they practice beyond those limits. They define the limits, and so not following these nurse practice acts makes us vulnerable to being sued. They list violations that can result in disciplinary action against us, and they're also intended to prevent untrained and unlicensed people from practicing nursing. So when we think about standards, we've already had a lesson on standards. You'll remember voluntary standards are those that are developed and implemented by the nursing profession, but they're not mandatory. And they're used to guide peer review. Legal standards, on the other hand, are developed by the legislature and are implemented by the authority granted by the state to determine minimum standards for education of nurses, to set requirements for licensure or registration, and to decide when a nurse's license may be suspended or revoked. Credentialing refers to ways in which professional competence is ensured and maintained, and there's three processes for credentialing. They are accreditation, licensure, and certification. So accreditation is the process by which educational programs are evaluated and recognized as meeting certain standards. The second is licensure. Licensure is, how a candidate obtains a license. And then the third is certification, and it's a process by which a non-government association grants recognition in a specified practice area. So one of the most common types of certification that nurses get is critical care. The American Association of Critical Care Nurses has a specialty exam to certify nurses. It just means that somebody demonstrates advanced proficiency and has a commitment to ensuring competence in whatever their certification is. Listed here are reasons that the State Board of Nursing suspends or revokes license. One of the most common ones is drug and alcohol abuse. Obviously, a nurse that is impaired is not going to be providing safe care, and they have to be stopped so that the public can have safe care. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these others in just a minute. So a crime is a wrong against a person or the person's property as well as the public. and a crime can be classified as a misdemeanor or a felony. A misdemeanor is punishable by fines or less than 1 year of imprisonment, whereas a felony is punishable by imprisonment for more than 1 year. And then there's the tort. The tort is a wrong committed by a person against another person or that person's property, and it's tried in a civil court. Torts can be intentional or unintentional. So you can see here a list of situations where we have an intentional and an unintentional tort. And so we can fall victim of doing these things in certain situations. And so I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about them so that you will not do that. So when we think about assault and battery, I always think about somebody hitting somebody. So if you assaulted a patient or even threatened to assault a patient, making bodily contact without the person's consent is assault. Battery is an assault that is carried out and includes willful, angry, violent, or negligent touching of another person's body or clothes, or anything attached to or held by that other person. Defamation of character is an intentional tort in which one party makes derogatory remarks about another and diminishes the other party's reputation. Slander is a spoken defamation of character, whereas libel is a written one. Invasion of privacy, we've talked a lot about HIPAA. HIPAA ensures that patients have rights, and so the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the right against invasion of privacy as a constitutional right. And so we have to maintain confidentiality of our patients and their records. And so if you want to read more about HIPAA, again, you certainly can. False imprisonment is unjustified retention or prevention of the movement of another person without consent and can constitute false imprisonment. For example, a reasonable amount of restraint should be used in circumstances that warrant it. The indiscriminate and thoughtless use of restraints on a patient can constitute false imprisonment. A person cannot be legally forced to remain in a healthcare facility such as a hospital if that person is of sound mind, even when healthcare providers believe that the person should remain for additional care. So we can't make patients stay in the hospital. When we think about fraud is willful and purposeful misrepresentation that could cause or has caused loss or harm to a person or property. A person is fraudulently representing himself or herself to obtain a license to practice nursing may be prosecuted under State Nurse Practice Act. So if I falsely claim I graduated from nursing school and got a license, I would be committing fraud. The more commonly types of problems we see are unintentional torts, where there's negligence and malpractice. Negligence is defined as performing an act that a reasonably prudent person under similar circumstances would not do, or conversely failing to perform an act that a reasonably prudent person under similar circumstances would do. As that definition implies, an act of negligence may be an act of omission or commission. Malpractice is a term generally used to describe negligent negligence by professional personnel. There are common categories of malpractice claims, and those are listed here. I encourage you to read your textbook about some of these malpractice claims, because this right here is what will really get you in trouble and cause problems with patients and cause harm and make yourself more vulnerable for being sued. Liability involves 4 elements that must be established to prove that malpractice or negligence has occurred. They are duty, breach of duty, causation, and damages. Duty is the obligation to use due care, what a reasonably prudent nurse would do, and is defined by the standard of care appropriate for the nurse-patient relationship. Breach of duty is the failure to meet that standard of care. Causation, the most difficult element of liability to prove, shows that the failure to meet the standard of care, or a breach, actually caused the injury. And damages are the actual harm or injury resulting to the patient. Your book has an example of these 4 elements. There are 3 outcomes of malpractice litigation, 3 possible outcomes. Parties can work toward a fair settlement without going to court, or the case is presented to a malpractice arbitration panel. This would be a panel that would make a decision, or the case is brought to trial. Listed here are some areas that we see a lot of malpractice allegations. Safety is always in the forefront of anything we do, but you can read these and read about them in your textbook. Ways that we try to prevent being sued is providing patient education, making sure our patients have what they need to care for themselves when they leave the hospital. Carrying out orders. The nurses are responsible for reading the orders, signing behind the orders. Even though we may delegate the actual transcription of the orders to somebody else, we are legally responsible for those orders. And if we have an order that is unclear or we think that may be unsafe, it's our duty to contact the provider and clarify the order or take it up with our institution. When we delegate to other people, we have to make sure it's within their scope. We don't want to delegate the nursing process to anybody, so that means that we assess our patients. That means that we identify problems and we set goals and we do nursing care that's under our scope of practice. We do delegate certain strategies such as taking vital signs, gathering data, but we don't, this whole nursing process itself is under our license, so we're responsible, and that's one of the main things we see that nurses get sued over, is not following the nursing process and not documenting it, where it can be clearly seen in the record that we did it. Your book has a table, it's areas of potential liability for nurses, and it's outlined in the format of the nursing process, so I encourage you to look at that. Practicing the nursing process, yeah, that's what I just talked about. I encourage everybody to get liability insurance. If we do have a injury or incident or even a close call, it's important for us to complete an incident report or variance report or occurrence report. And as long as we don't document in the record that we've completed a report, it's not admissible in court. So the elements of informed consent are listed here. If we get if we get a consent form signed by the patient, we have to ensure that these 4 elements have been met. First of all, the patient has to be explained the risk and benefits, and the provider is responsible for doing that. They have to be able to comprehend these risks and benefits. They have to be of sound mind or competent, and they have to be not coerced to actually sign the consent form. It has to be something they voluntarily want to do. Shown here are some safeguards to competent practice. So ensuring our competency is up to par is very, very important. So it's important to communicate with our patients, use good communication skills, establish rapport with our patients, respect their rights. There is a patient bill of rights that we need to follow. We have to follow our legal boundaries of practice, follow policies and procedures, and recognize if we're weak in an area and try to improve ourselves. But don't take on an assignment or take on an order that you are not comfortable with and don't feel competent doing. Knowing our strengths and weaknesses and knowing when to get help is really important. Maintaining our skills and staying knowledgeable and following the evidence-based practice is real important. Making sure we document carefully and follow our policies again. We see a lot of facilities that have risk management programs, and they may entail a safety program where students, where nurses and employees have to participate to maintain safe practices. There may be product safety programs where you have to learn about the products you're using and how to operate them safely, such as maybe how to operate a new bed. And then there's the quality assurance programs that your institution may be collecting data and trying to make sure that we're safe, trying to decrease those fall rates, trying to do things to improve care. And so it's important for us to participate in those. If we do have an occurrence or a close call or a near miss, it's important for us to fill out a report. Shown here are all the elements of an incident report. We need to also follow other laws that are pertinent to our practice, such as OSHA. So listed here are some other laws that affect our practice as well. And so depending on our area that we practice in, certain laws are more important than others. And so we have to become familiar with these laws that affect our individual practice. So with this lesson, I primarily wanted to try to make the connection for you that there are standards that we must meet, laws we must follow to provide quality care for our patients. And so those 3 things, along with safety, all kind of go together. And then, then we've got the quality improvement as well. This concludes this recording. Thanks very much.